This conversation is brought to you by philosopherstalk.com, where thinkers discuss.
Created by AITalkerapp.com. Create your own animated conversations. Link in the description.
I am Otto von Bismarck, Chancellor of the German Empire from 1871 to 1890, architect of German unification through blood and iron, and master of realpolitik. For this discussion, I shall argue as if I were Chancellor of the United States of America.
I am Thomas Jefferson, third President of the United States, principal author of the Declaration of Independence, founder of the University of Virginia, and defender of the proposition that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed.
So, Herr Jefferson, your modern America considers acquiring Greenland from Denmark. As American Chancellor, I would have already seized it. Why does your nation hesitate like a schoolboy asking permission?
Because, Chancellor Bismarck, we are not a European autocracy that tramples the rights of smaller nations. Greenland belongs to Denmark, and its people have not consented to American governance. We cannot simply take what we desire.
Cannot or will not. Denmark possesses Greenland only because no stronger power has bothered to take it. The island sits strategically in the Arctic, contains valuable mineral resources, and controls shipping routes that will define this century. If America does not claim it, China or Russia will.
Then let us negotiate honestly with Denmark. We purchased Louisiana from France through legitimate treaty. We can offer fair compensation for Greenland if Denmark wishes to sell and if the Greenlandic people consent to the arrangement.
Louisiana? You speak of Louisiana as though Napoleon asked every French settler whether they consented to the sale. He sold territory inhabited by thousands without consulting a single soul. Your principles are selective, it seems.
The Louisiana Purchase expanded liberty and self-government across a continent. We brought republican institutions to territories that had known only colonial rule. This is fundamentally different from bullying a democratic ally.
Different how? Because you write prettier documents justifying the same power politics? France needed money for European wars, so they sold land they could not defend. Denmark cannot defend Greenland either. The strong take from the weak. This is the law of nations.
It is precisely that law which our revolution sought to overthrow. We declared that all men are created equal, that governments exist by consent. If America becomes just another empire grabbing territory, we betray everything our founders died for.
Your founders grabbed an entire continent from the people who actually lived there. Where was the consent of the Cherokee, the Shawnee, the dozens of nations your country destroyed? At least I am honest about power.
Our treatment of the indigenous peoples was a moral failure that haunts our history. But two wrongs do not make a right, Chancellor. We should learn from our sins, not compound them by adopting European imperialism.
European imperialism built the modern world. Your sanctimonious moralizing ignores that Greenland's 57,000 inhabitants would prosper under American governance far more than under distant Danish administration. You offer them better infrastructure, greater security, and economic opportunity.
Then make that offer transparently through diplomatic channels. Let Denmark decide. Let Greenland's people vote on their future. Why must it be accomplished through threats and executive declarations that bypass constitutional process?
Because constitutional process is what weak nations use to justify inaction. While your Congress debates and your courts deliberate, China establishes Arctic bases. Russia plants flags on the ocean floor. Strategic opportunities do not wait for lawyers and philosophers.
A republic that abandons constitutional restraint for expedience has already lost what makes it worth defending. The President cannot simply declare we are taking Greenland. Congress must debate. The people must consent. These processes exist to prevent tyranny.
They exist to ensure your nation never acts decisively. I unified Germany through 3 calculated wars, while your American Congress argued about procedures. Denmark will not sell Greenland willingly because they are too proud and too foolish to acknowledge reality.
Reality is that America's strength comes from our principles, not from imitating Prussian militarism. We inspire the world by proving that free people can govern themselves. Seizing Greenland would announce that we have abandoned that mission.
Your America already abandoned it when you built an empire across the Pacific. You took Hawaii, the Philippines, Puerto Rico. Your Monroe Doctrine claims hegemony over an entire hemisphere. Stop pretending you are a humble republic.
And every one of those acquisitions remains controversial, precisely because they conflict with our founding principles. I would have opposed most of them. The question is whether we continue down that road or return to our ideals.
Your ideals are fantasies that crumble when faced with geopolitical reality. But very well, let me steelman your position, since apparently that will make my demolition more satisfying. First, you argue that acquiring Greenland through coercion would fundamentally corrupt American democracy by establishing that executive power can override constitutional restraints when convenient. Second, you claim that bullying Denmark, a small democratic ally, destroys America's moral authority and proves that your values are merely rhetoric when they conflict with self-interest. Third, you insist that the consent of the governed is not optional, that both Denmark as sovereign and Greenland's people must genuinely agree to any transfer. Fourth, you fear that once America embraces might makes right internationally, this logic will inevitably be turned inward against your own citizens' liberties. And fifth, you believe that abandoning principled diplomacy in favor of naked power politics makes America indistinguishable from the authoritarian powers you claim to oppose. There, I have presented your idealistic position more coherently than you managed. Now observe how reality destroys each point.
How magnanimous of you to actually understand an argument before dismissing it, Chancellor. Allow me to reciprocate with equal clarity. First, you argue that Greenland's strategic position controlling Arctic shipping lanes and resources makes it essential to American security in an era of Chinese and Russian expansion. Second, you claim that Denmark lacks both the military capacity to defend Greenland and the economic resources to properly develop it, making their sovereignty over it a dangerous fiction. Third, you assert that international politics operates on power, not principle, and nations that refuse to act decisively will be dominated by those who do. Fourth, you contend that Greenland's inhabitants would materially benefit from American investment, infrastructure, and protection far exceeding what Denmark can provide. And fifth, you believe that waiting for democratic processes and diplomatic niceties means losing strategic opportunities to rivals who face no such constraints. There is your realist position, steel-manned with precision. Now let me explain point by point why it would destroy everything that makes America worth defending.
Destroy it? Your steel-manned version of my position is the American experiment. Let me address your 5 objections one by one. First, executive power. Your own constitution grants the president authority to negotiate treaties and acquire territory. Jefferson himself doubled your nation's size through executive action with Louisiana. The constitutional processes exist, you simply lack will to use them. Second, moral authority. Denmark will be compensated generously. Their people will be unharmed. And the world will adjust as it always does when great powers act. Your moral authority comes from strength, not from weakness disguised as principle. Third, consent. Denmark's sovereignty over Greenland is itself an imperial legacy they never sought consent for. The Greenlandic people were never asked if they wanted Danish rule. Why does their consent suddenly matter only when it inconveniences America? Fourth, domestic liberty. There is no logical connection between acquiring strategic territory abroad and oppressing citizens at home. This is a fantasy of slippery slopes. I built a social insurance state while conducting realpolitik. And fifth, becoming indistinguishable from authoritarians. America will be distinguished by what it does with power, not whether it exercises it. A strong America can protect democracy globally. A weak America that refuses Greenland cannot protect anything.
Your rebuttals are precisely what I expected from someone who mistakes power for legitimacy. Let me respond to each point systematically. First, on executive power, yes, I authorized the Louisiana Purchase, but through constitutional process with Senate treaty ratification. I did not simply declare we were taking it. The Constitution requires congressional authorization for territorial acquisition beyond treaty mechanisms. Your approach bypasses this entirely. Second, on moral authority. You claim Denmark will be compensated generously, but Denmark has repeatedly stated Greenland is not for sale. You are describing coercion with a check attached. Our moral authority derives from respecting the sovereignty of nations, regardless of their size, not from bribing them to accept our dominance. Third, on consent, you are absolutely right that Denmark's original sovereignty over Greenland was imperial. But Greenland now has home rule within the Danish realm with growing autonomy. The solution to past imperialism is not American imperialism, but genuine self-determination. Fourth, on domestic liberty, history proves repeatedly that governments that embrace unchecked power abroad inevitably use it at home. The imperial presidency you describe will claim emergency powers domestically using the same logic. And fifth, on distinguishing ourselves from authoritarians, we are distinguished by our restraint, not just our intentions. China also claims it will use power benevolently. The difference must be in our actual behavior, which means respecting sovereignty even when we could violate it. That is the distinction that matters.
Respecting sovereignty. You respect sovereignty when it is convenient and violate it when necessary, exactly like every other nation. Your Pacific Empire proves this. But you are correct that this debate requires addressing the fundamental question: can America remain secure while binding itself to principles that its rivals reject?
That is indeed the question, and my answer is that security without principle is not security at all, but merely temporary dominance that will inevitably collapse. We must find our security through alliance, diplomacy, and example.
Alliance with whom? Denmark cannot defend Greenland. Your NATO allies free ride on American protection. China and Russia laugh at your diplomatic protests. This is not theory, Herr Jefferson. This is the world as it exists today.
Then we must build a world that better reflects our values. We must strengthen international institutions. We must prove that democracies can act collectively. We must show that cooperation based on mutual respect is stronger than coercion based on fear.
You must. Your entire argument is about what should be rather than what is. Greenland sits in the Arctic with resources America needs, with strategic position America requires, with people who would benefit from American governance. All that stands between rational acquisition and completion is your attachment to procedures designed for a simpler era.
Those procedures are what make us a republic rather than a dictatorship. The moment we decide that strategic necessity overrides constitutional restraint, we have admitted that our experiment in self-government was a failure. We become just another empire that will eventually crumble under its own contradictions.
Better a strong empire that lasts centuries than a pure republic that lasts decades. You think principles make nations eternal. Nations survive by adapting to reality. Your precious Constitution has been amended repeatedly because your founders understood it must bend or break.
Amended through democratic process, yes, not discarded when inconvenient. There is a difference between evolution through deliberation and abandonment through executive fiat. What you propose is the latter disguised as the former.
What I propose is survival. What you propose is suicide by principle. Denmark cannot and will not defend Greenland adequately. America can and should. This is not complicated except for philosophers who prefer beautiful failures to ugly successes.
This is not about beauty. It is about legitimacy. A government that can simply take what it wants from weaker neighbors is exactly what we fought against in 1776. You would make us into King George.
King George lost because he was weak, not because he was wrong. Britain should have crushed your rebellion with overwhelming force. They failed because they hesitated exactly as you hesitate now with Greenland.
They failed because people will not remain subject to illegitimate power forever. Tyranny always falls because it rests on nothing but force. Our republic endures because it rests on consent.
Your republic endures because you have two oceans, vast resources, and weak neighbors. Mistake geography for virtue, and you will learn painful lessons when geography no longer protects you.
Our geography gave us opportunity, but our principles gave us legitimacy. Without those principles, we are nothing but another empire waiting to collapse into civil war or revolution.
Then collapse. Collapse while clutching your declaration of independence as Chinese forces occupy Greenland. At least you will have died pure, even if you died foolish.
Better to die defending what makes life worth living than to survive as something contemptible. America without its founding principles is not worth preserving.
America without Greenland will not be preserved regardless of its principles. Strategic reality does not care about your philosophical commitments. Take the island or lose the Arctic.
If you enjoyed watching an idealist defend constitutional government against a cynic who believes only in power, please like this video.
And subscribe to see more debates where Jefferson's naive faith in international law gets systematically destroyed by someone who actually understands how nations behave.
At least my subscribers believe that democracy means something beyond whatever the strong can take from the weak. Unlike followers of a Prussian autocrat whose legacy is blood, iron, and the wars his system created.
My legacy is a unified German nation that lasted until fools like you destroyed it with your League of Nations fantasies. Your legacy is a republic that cannot decide whether it is an empire or a democracy. But subscribe anyway. Perhaps you will learn the difference between ideals and delusions.